How shameless of you, wanting sushi as a daughter-in-law. Non-family members pay for themselves. If you want it so badly, go order it yourself. A loud bang echoed through the quiet New Year's room as my mother-in-law struck the table. My chopsticks slipped from my hand, clattering onto the tatami mat. The quiet, mocking laughter of my gathered in-laws felt like a snake's tongue licking over me, chilling me to the bone. I clasped my trembling fingers tightly together on my lap, my face burning with a mix of shame and frustration. I gripped my hand so hard that my nails left crescent-shaped marks on my palms. The handmade New Year's dishes I had prepared with care since early morning now tasted bitter in my mouth. Amanda abruptly stood, sliding her feet across the tatami mat, and reached for the phone on the stand. "Hello, Mr. Izumi? We'll need sushi for 10, please." She glanced at me with a wicked smile as she placed the order, clearly enjoying the moment. I fought to keep my face steady, suppressing the heat rising to my cheeks. "What's with that face? You look so suspicious. I guess your background shows." She pointed at me and laughed in a loud, obnoxious way, slapping her hand against the table and turning to the gathered relatives as if seeking their agreement. Laughter broke out again. All right. Mom, don't say such harsh things." My shoulder jolted at my husband's voice, and for a moment I felt a glimmer of hope. "Not letting her eat at all would be cruel, but honestly, you wouldn't even appreciate fancy food, right? So just have some ginger." His words echoed with a cold laugh, and I tried to stand slowly, but my legs trembled so much they wouldn't cooperate. Leaning on the tatami mat with one hand for support, I finally managed to stand and involuntarily murmured, "I'm sorry." I thought to myself that surely it was because I was a bad daughter-in-law that I was treated this way. Here in my husband's family home, so far from my own, nothing I did ever seemed to go right. But today, something felt different. Something that I had long suppressed was now quietly, yet unmistakably, igniting deep within me. I fled to the kitchen, clutching the phone with trembling hands. From the room, I could hear my husband and Amanda laughing loudly. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the receiver. "Hello, Mr. Hidaka?" I said, my voice shaky. On the other side of the line, it felt as if the wheels of fate were quietly beginning to turn. "My name is Lily James, 28 years old, a part-time working housewife living with my husband Paul. We've been married for a few years, but we don't have children yet. Our life was generally peaceful, though I couldn't ignore the occasional comments from others about our lack of children. In this small town, a little far from the city, everyone seemed to know everyone else, and the constant questions and comments about my private life made me feel trapped and uncomfortable." "Lily, still no kids, huh?" "Well, we're hoping for one soon." "You can't just hope for it, you know. You have to try harder." Embarrassed by the blunt comment, I felt myself shrinking inwardly, looking down. Many of my coworkers at the supermarket knew my mother-in-law Amanda, and though they weren't openly cruel, they often pried too much, making me feel out of place. But I endured it, thinking I was helping to uphold Amanda's reputation. Shortly after we got married, Amanda had told me, "I won't allow you to live off my son's earnings as a full-time housewife. I'll get you a job at the supermarket." At 76, Amanda was a prominent figure in the local women's association, and she had many connections. So when she arranged the job for me, I had no choice but to accept. Reluctantly, I went to work at the supermarket, enduring the harsh looks and remarks from those around me, keeping my head down. Naturally a quiet person, I was always cautious not to say anything that might cause problems. This caution stemmed from a time early in my job when I accidentally mentioned a trivial complaint about my husband, which quickly reached Amanda and resulted in a stern lecture. In our town, people spent their free time gossiping while shopping, as everything from schools to shops could be found here, making it a complete self-contained community. Amanda's information network was impressive. It sometimes felt like people were eavesdropping on every word I said. My in-laws' house, just a short distance from ours, was a frequent hub for gatherings. Amanda often hosted parties with neighbors and relatives, and I was expected to assist with everything, from cooking to cleaning up afterward. Among these gatherings, some large-scale events happened multiple times a year, such as the year-end cleaning, New Year's greetings, and seasonal festivals. For these occasions, I would often order sushi from a well-regarded sushi shop in town, as it was difficult to prepare everything alone. The owner, Kazuo Hidaka, was my childhood friend and had known me since we were kids. His sushi restaurant was famous in town, attracting local community leaders. My husband Paul was the youngest son in his family, born after a long gap with two much older sisters. During a casual conversation before marriage, he had joked about feeling like he had 3 mothers, given the age gap. My own family was a traditional large family. I was the youngest of 3 siblings with 2 older brothers. My parents cherished me deeply, especially my father, who doted on me. My father ran a fruit and vegetable shop, now managed by my oldest brother, and I always treasured my family deeply, hoping to bring the same dedication to my new family after marriage. However, that hope was dashed when I first met my husband's parents. From the beginning, Amanda eyed me with suspicion. "Your family runs a business, don't they, Lily?" Honestly, the James family holds a much higher status. I was stunned by her outdated attitude. Even my husband seemed surprised, and he quickly tried to brush it off. "Mom, what are you saying? We're just a regular family now. Dad doesn't work anymore, and I have an ordinary job." My husband's family, once influential, had lost most of their land and status, and now my husband worked a regular job to support his parents. My father-in-law, Brian, now 79, had barely worked and relied heavily on my husband's earnings since he graduated high school. My husband's words caused a brief, awkward silence, during which my father-in-law finally spoke up. "Regardless, it's a good thing Paul's getting married. My old age and our family's future are secure." "But dear, are you sure you're fine with this, letting a woman of questionable background into our family? Her family runs a business after all." "What matters is that we can have a peaceful retirement. Such worries are minor." I felt a pang of discomfort at my father-in-law's words, sensing that he saw me only as someone to help support their family. Although I tried my best to fit in and earn their approval, Amanda looked down on me, constantly reminding me of my family's lowly background. "Living off other people's money, that's what your family does, right? That's why you lack refinement." Over time, her words chipped away at my self-worth, and eventually, I began feeling ashamed of my own upbringing. I tried harder and harder to please her, hoping for approval, but instead, her disdain only grew. My mother-in-law often spoke of her own hardships and claimed she endured far worse from her mother-in-law, using this as justification for treating me poorly. Watching her, even my husband began to believe her words, eventually telling me that if I just tried harder, she might finally accept me. "Maybe you just need to put in more effort, Lily. Mom's bound to accept you if you try harder to be a good daughter-in-law." I started blaming myself, thinking that if I just worked harder, things would change. But the more I did, the more her demands escalated. Soon, cleaning before weekly family gatherings became routine, regardless of how I felt. This year's end was particularly grueling, as I felt sick with a 38-degree fever, but was still expected to finish the year-end cleaning without complaint. Wanting their approval, I didn't voice any objections and worked tirelessly despite my fever. Even my cooking was constantly criticized by Amanda, but I continued preparing meals, including my husband's lunch with care. The one bright spot in my week was Mr. Hidaka's occasional phone calls, where he'd ask how I was doing. His kind concern was my only source of comfort. Finally, the biggest gathering of the year, the New Year's celebration, arrived. In my in-laws' family, the New Year brought a constant flow of visitors, leaving me with no time to rest. Since our marriage, I hadn't been able to return home for New Year's even once. My parents and brothers worried about me, but I had resigned myself to this tradition. Unlike me, my husband's sister Rachel returned home freely during New Year's, and as the family gathered around the table that day, Amanda made an announcement. "Since my daughters are here today, let's splurge and order from Mr. Hidaka's sushi shop." My husband and his sisters perked up, looking delighted. Yes, Hidaka's sushi is delicious. This is such a treat, Mom. Yes, it's New Year's after all. We'll go all out. Amanda began counting the guests and placed the order. However, as always, I noticed she deliberately left one person out, me. Amanda had only ordered enough sushi for everyone else, leaving me out as she often did, making it clear that, as the daughter-in-law, I was not considered family. Although I was used to this treatment, seeing her ignore my presence so blatantly stung, especially with my sisters-in-law smirking at me. Without thinking, I found myself asking her quietly, "What about my portion?" She finished the phone call, glanced my way, and said coldly, "How dare you, as a daughter-in-law, expect something so expensive? If you want sushi, pay for it yourself." Reflexively, I lowered my gaze and whispered, "I'm sorry." Apparently dissatisfied with my apology, she responded harshly, "Oh, what a half-hearted apology. And what's with that sullen face? Just as I thought, your background really shows." She pointed at me and laughed in a loud, obnoxious way, slapping her hand against the table, and turning to the gathered relatives as if seeking their agreement. Laughter broke out again. All right. Don't be so mean to her, Mom." My husband's voice seemed like he was defending me, but his tone was indifferent. "Not giving her anything would be too cruel. But she probably wouldn't appreciate it anyway, right? Just eat the pickled ginger." My husband's mocking laugh echoed in the room, and I was left speechless. They often berated me, and I had come to believe it was somehow my fault, that I had continually disappointed them. I had tried my best to be a good wife and a good daughter-in-law, yet here I was, feeling utterly lost. My heart felt like it was reaching its limit. My husband had never once truly taken my side since our marriage. I bit my lip, looking down as I tried to contain the growing sadness inside me. Though he had once seemed to cherish me, he now constantly sided with Amanda, gradually becoming just like her. All along, I had convinced myself that it was my failure as a daughter-in-law that led to this situation. But this New Year's Day, something shifted within me. A sense of defiance I hadn't known was there began to surface. Filled with a sense of rebellious courage, I excused myself to the kitchen, picked up the phone, and dialed Mr. Hidaka's sushi shop. "Hello, this is Hidaka Sushi." I took a shaky breath and said softly, "Hello, this is Lily." There was a brief silence before he responded gently, "Lily, is everything all right?" His caring tone nearly broke me, and I could only manage trembling yes. Understanding without needing further explanation, he replied with a calm and reassuring, "Got it." A short while later, Mr. Hidaka arrived himself, bringing a luxurious platter of premium sushi to my in-laws' home. Although his employees had already delivered the sushi Amanda had ordered, he personally brought my order separately. "Here's the sushi platter, priced at $300. He announced this loudly enough that the relatives in the main room could hear. Curious, they began gathering at the entrance to see what was happening. Meeting my gaze, he addressed me clearly. "This premium sushi was specially ordered by the young lady of the house." He invited me over, opening the sushi platter in front of everyone. The sushi was a dazzling array of the finest ingredients, far beyond the ordinary selection my in-laws were used to. The luxurious display of sushi astonished my in-laws, and I felt a sense of lightness, like I was floating as I watched them murmur and whisper. For the first time, I felt liberated, as if the weight pressing on my chest had been lifted, even though a tinge of guilt lingered. Turning to Mr. Hidaka, I thanked him softly. My mother-in-law, seeing the difference in quality, was visibly taken aback, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find words. I didn't order anything like this." My husband and his sisters began protesting loudly, claiming it was a mistake, that there must have been a mix-up in the delivery. But Mr. Hidaka merely raised an eyebrow and gave them a sharp look. "Didn't you say yourself, ma'am, that she isn't family? How dare you say such nonsense? I won't tolerate such lies." Mr. Hidaka ignored her outburst and continued calmly. "No mistake. The young lady here asked me to bill this separately, as if it wasn't for family."
His words created an awkward silence that filled the room. With a sigh, he then turned to my husband and fixed his gaze on him.
"Young man, she is your family, isn't she? You should be the one to pay for her." "The $300? I don't have that kind of cash right now."
Staying composed, Mr. Hidaka calmly handed over the bill and looked directly at my husband.
"The young lady here is a valued customer. She's also someone important to you, isn't she?"
My husband shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Mr. Hidaka's unwavering gaze as his shoulders slumped. Watching this, Mr. Hidaka sighed again before turning to Amanda, his tone turning slightly disappointed.
"I never imagined a household that would exclude someone in their own family from a meal."
Amanda's face turned bright red, and she began yelling furiously, spewing insults, her voice grating and loud. Her behavior drew murmurs from the relatives gathered around, some raising their eyebrows in disapproval. Unfazed, Mr. Hidaka continued his work with calm professionalism, contrasting starkly with the chaotic atmosphere my in-laws created. As he prepared to leave, he turned back toward Amanda and my husband, adding one final pointed remark.
"As you've made clear, for anyone who isn't family, it's self-pay."
Surprisingly, I felt a surge of confidence as I flashed a calm smile and addressed my in-laws. "Yes, as you said, family members pay for themselves, so I'll cover my own." I surprised even myself as the words came out, and for once, I felt unburdened, a kind of joy lifting my spirits. Mr. Hidaka cast a brief, approving smile in my direction before turning back to my husband. My husband, at a loss, turned to his mother for help, and she begrudgingly handed over the payment to Mr. Hidaka, fuming. Mr. Hidaka accepted their payment with a polite nod, as if nothing unusual had happened, and left, leaving a trail of whispers among the relatives behind him. After he left, some relatives began exchanging opinions, some supporting Mr. Hidaka's actions, others questioning the in-laws' behavior, the gossip spreading like wildfire. That evening, my husband stormed out, humiliated, and went drinking with his friends, not returning until the next morning. For the first time in ages, I savored the meal Mr. Hidaka had brought, enjoying every bite of the special sushi he had made just for me. The following morning, my husband returned home, hungover and still fuming with resentment.
"Because of you, I was humiliated. My friends laughed at me, saying I can't even control my own wife. Mom's furious too, saying it's my job to discipline you."
In our town, traditional views about marriage were still deeply ingrained. Even younger people like my husband's friends held outdated beliefs about gender roles. He glared at me with bloodshot eyes, demanding I repay the money for the sushi he had covered on my behalf. I shook my head firmly, refusing his demand. For the first time, I had defied both him and Amanda. It was a choice I had made for myself to reclaim my dignity, and I couldn't go back now. My husband's anger flared, and he stopped speaking to me entirely. A wall of cold silence between us. Things only got worse after that. Amanda began spreading rumors in the neighborhood, calling me a terrible daughter-in-law who selfishly ordered luxury sushi with my husband's money.
"She's an awful wife, taking advantage of my son's hard-earned money. I knew it was a mistake letting a merchant's daughter into our family."
Her friends and acquaintances, many of whom worked at the supermarket with me, began treating me with open disdain. At work, colleagues ignored me, blamed me for accidents I had nothing to do with, and assigned me the most undesirable tasks. Whenever I worked the register, Amanda's acquaintances would come through the line, making complaints and insulting me. "Why do they even let someone so incompetent work here? They should just fire you." I once approached my manager for help, hoping for support, but he brushed me off coldly.
"I've heard complaints about your poor work attitude. If you're causing problems, maybe it's best you take a break from work."
Shocked, I tried to respond, but he continued, dismissing me before I could explain.
"Honestly, you're more trouble than you're worth. We'll consider your future here at the next contract renewal."
With a heavy heart, I left the store that day, feeling utterly defeated. Just one phone call, one moment of rebellion had cost me my job. As days passed, I stopped going to work altogether, burdened by regret. My husband's silent treatment continued, and my in-laws' hostility only grew worse. One morning, as I took out the trash, a neighbor, the wife of the town council leader, approached me with a glare. "Don't you dare put your garbage here." It was decided in the council meeting that problem families can't use the town's trash collection. Wait, please, I haven't. Excuses again. No apology. Your mother-in-law was right. You're a disgrace. She left fuming, and I was left standing there in shock, overwhelmed by the sheer hostility. As I returned inside, wondering what to do, my husband walked out without a word, avoiding even a glance in my direction. "I'm going to my parents' house for a while. I don't want to see your face." "Then please, let me go back to my family's home." He shot me a look of contempt, his eyes blazing with anger. "Ha, so you can spread lies to your family? If you cause any more trouble, I'll sue you for slander." Frightened by his rage, I sank to the floor as he smirked down at me. My husband looked down at me sneering and added one more painful remark. "Just like Mom said, your family spoiled you. They didn't raise you right." My heart sank further, feeling utterly powerless. But before I could respond, I heard footsteps approaching from outside. A familiar female voice spoke gently from the doorway. "Excuse me, is everything all right here? I thought I heard something." I looked up slowly and saw the council leader's wife, the same woman who had scolded me about the trash earlier, standing there with her husband, the town council leader. My husband, startled by their unexpected visit, looked uncomfortable, but the council leader's wife quickly began to speak. "I came here to apologize to you, Lily. I misunderstood and acted hastily." She approached me, helping me to my feet and gently dabbing at the tears on my face. The council leader then turned to my husband, his expression serious. "I heard from Mr. Hidaka about how you've been treating your wife. It's unacceptable." What? That's not true." Another voice joined in, cutting through the tension. It was Mr. Hidaka, who had quietly entered the doorway behind the council leader. "I've seen your actions, Paul. Your words and behavior have spoken for themselves." Mr. Hidaka's presence surprised me, and sensing my confusion, he gave me a calm, reassuring smile. "Lily, your father called me earlier, worried about you. He asked me to check on things." Relieved, I listened as Mr. Hidaka turned back to address my husband, his tone firm. "Paul, it's already known around town how you and your family have treated Lily." "Indeed. I also know about the way your family mistreated her and the rumors your mother spread about her family." It was widely known that Amanda had suffered under her own mother-in-law, and she frequently mentioned it to justify her own treatment of me. "To think I believed her, but I can see now that she's chosen to pass down the same treatment she endured." Hearing this, my husband looked down, ashamed, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. But Mr. Hidaka wasn't finished. He addressed my husband firmly. "Paul, I even heard that your parents insulted Lily's family business and her upbringing. Is this true? As someone who ran a small business myself, I find that utterly unacceptable." The council leader's face hardened, and I could see he felt personally offended by their disparaging remarks. "Paul, I used to respect your father, but after this, I'm deeply disappointed. This town deserves better." "Yes, we trusted your family with community responsibilities, but this behavior can't be ignored." Hearing this, my husband looked shattered. The facade his family had built was crumbling around him, and he seemed lost. Turning to me, Mr. Hidaka offered a kind, steadying hand. "Lily, let me take you home. Gather your belongings." "Thank you, Mr. Hidaka, or rather, Uncle Hidaka." I lowered my head in gratitude before hurrying to pack my things. As I left the house, the council leader and his wife bid farewell, heading home as I climbed into Mr. Hidaka's car. The ride back to my parents' home was peaceful, and Mr. Hidaka reassured me quietly as we drove. "You deserve to live your life freely, Lily. Don't let anyone take that from you." His words gave me the final push I needed to decide. I would divorce my husband and move forward. On that drive, I thought back over everything. My years of self-sacrifice, constantly worrying about how I appeared to others and realizing how trapped I had felt in this town. After attending a university in the city and briefly experiencing life outside, I had returned to this town hoping for stability. But in the end, I had rushed into marriage with my high school senior, trying to escape a vague sense of unease and guilt. And that fear and guilt had kept me bound, unable to stand up for myself until now. In reality, both my father and Mr. Hidaka had been quietly worried for me all along, and they had finally stepped in to help me find my way out of this situation. As I sat in Mr. Hidaka's car, I thought of everything I'd been through, and for the first time, I felt myself truly letting go of the pain. A few tears escaped, but soon a feeling of peace began to fill my heart, as though I were shedding the heavy chains that had bound me. In the following weeks, words of my departure spread through the town. My in-laws' reputation quickly declined as the council and local women's association members turned their backs on them. Brian was stripped of his title as head of the elderly association, and Amanda was expelled from the women's group. Their influence and social standing were completely lost, and they became isolated within the community. My husband's workplace also caught wind of the situation. His supervisor warned him that such treatment of family members could tarnish the company's image. He was eventually transferred to a less desirable position within the company. Our divorce went through without much resistance. With nowhere left to turn, my husband and in-laws seemed to have lost the will to fight. Shortly after, they quietly moved to a nearby town, leaving behind the place they once considered their home. I later heard from Mr. Hidaka that my former husband had visited his sushi shop alone the night before they moved. He had spoken quietly, admitting, I was too bound by my parents' control and ended up losing someone important to me. Looking back, Lily was a good wife. Mr. Hidaka had listened patiently, then responded in a calm voice. Sometimes, Paul, change requires letting go of good things we thought we needed. But often, by the time we realize that, it's too late. Hearing about my ex-husband's regret, I felt a twinge of sadness. But deep down, I knew this was the right path. As difficult as it was, letting go and reclaiming my own life had brought me a sense of liberation. Back home, I began a new chapter, slowly rebuilding my life. Mr. Hidaka offered me a part-time job helping at a sushi shop on weekends, and I gladly accepted. My parents and brothers supported me wholeheartedly, and gradually, with their love and encouragement, I started to regain my strength and happiness. One weekend, some former coworkers from the supermarket visited Mr. Hidaka's shop to eat. Seeing me there, happily working, they looked at me with a mixture of awe and perhaps even envy. I'm sorry for everything, Lily. We didn't treat you well. Watching them bow and apologize, I wondered how they felt, seeing me thriving in a new environment. Time passed, and one day, Mr. Hidaka turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Lily, you have a special touch. Have you ever thought about opening your own place someday? I felt myself blush, smiling at his suggestion. Thank you. I'd love to help people with my cooking one day. Mr. Hidaka gave me a proud look, his eyes squinting warmly. A while later, something unexpected happened. My former sisters-in-law came to Mr. Hidaka's shop, and they too apologized to me. We were wrong, Lily. We only followed Mother's lead, not realizing the hurt we caused. I hope we can make things right. They admitted that they had been reprimanded by their own families, finally realizing how they had blindly followed their mother's behavior. With this new perspective, they each seemed to find the courage to take a stand with their own marriages. My former sisters-in-law shared that they were planning to leave town with their families, realizing they needed to change their lives as well. After seeing what happened, I know I need to speak up more in my own marriage. I've been letting things slide, but I realize now that's not right. They told me that since then, the other women in the family had started voicing their thoughts more openly to their husbands, creating a shift in family dynamics. Slowly it seemed a change was spreading through the town. A newfound courage among wives and daughters-in-law to express their own feelings and stand up for themselves. Feeling the breeze of this new change, I sensed hope growing within me. Returning to my parents' home, I embraced this fresh start, and my life gradually settled into a peaceful, fulfilling rhythm. Working at Mr. Hidaka's shop, I enjoyed my new freedom and the sense of purpose it gave me. With my family's support, I felt like I was slowly healing and growing stronger, bit by bit regaining my joy and self-confidence. My family's encouragement helped me rediscover my love for cooking, and each day I worked, I felt more at ease, finding peace in my new life. And so, life went on. My former in-laws, now isolated and without influence, struggled with their new reality. My ex-husband's father was removed from his position in the community, and Amanda, too, lost her place in the Women's Association. Unable to bear the loss of their social standing, they moved away to a nearby town where they remained mostly forgotten. For me, this closure brought a deep sense of release. With each passing day, I was grateful to be surrounded by love and support, and I found myself blossoming anew. I came to understand that being true to oneself, having the courage to stand up for one's worth, and seeking genuine kindness were far more valuable than the approval of others. Over time, I even began to dream of someday opening my own small place where I could share my cooking and warmth with others. And although the journey had been difficult, I learned that the courage to walk away and reclaim my life had given me something precious, my own sense of self and the strength to build a brighter future. As I continued working at Mr. Hidaka's sushi shop, I felt both proud and grateful for the life I was creating, a life shaped by my choices for myself and for those who had always believed in me.